Chapter 6. Ascent, Revised. Unknown. Chapter 6. Ascent, Revised. Davidge. Davidge was talking. He knew he was talking because he could hear himself. A continuous stream of technical observations and status updates that served no purpose other than to fill the space between his ears with something other than the image of Sato's chest cavity opened like a cabinet, the contents rearranged by hands that moved faster than human eyes could track. Chem light at Junction 7. Confirmed. We're en route, heading for Junction 4, 200 meters approximately. I and us are holding. Davidge, Karim said. Yeah. Keep it down. Davidge turned the volume to a mutter. He couldn't stop. Stopping meant silence, and silence meant Sato's face through the visor. The surprise, the terrible innocence of a death that had happened too fast for the dying to understand. Davidge had seen death before. He was a combat medic. Death was a professional acquaintance. But he had never seen anything kill that efficiently. 3 seconds. Entry to exit. A human being disassembled with the casual precision of someone opening a package. The team was moving fast. 9 people now, not 10. The gap where Sato had been was a physical thing, a space in the formation that nobody filled, because filling it would mean acknowledging that it needed to be filled. Ruiz on point, Karim behind her, Okafor. Tanaka and Marsh in the center, flanked by Obi. Davidge behind them, Achebe on rear guard. Volkov was beside Marsh, moving with the rigid, mechanical gait of a man whose body was operating on instructions from a brain that had stopped processing the world around him and was simply executing the last coherent order it had received. Move. His face behind his visor was blank, not calm, not focused, absent. Volkov had watched Sato die from 6 meters away, and something inside him had retreated to a place where the information couldn't reach. Davidge recognized the signs. Acute stress response, not the functional kind that sharpened soldiers into better versions of themselves, but the dissociative kind that turned people into automatons. Volkov was walking, breathing, and placing one foot in front of the other. He was not, in any meaningful sense, present. They passed Junction 7. The chem light was there, green, steady, undisturbed. The tunnel climbed toward Junction 4 and the colony above. The air cooled fractionally with each 10 meters of ascent, the sweet, organic smell thinning, the biological coating on the walls becoming less dense. They were leaving creature territory. They were ascending toward human space. Behind them, the creatures followed. Achebe called it first. Contact rear, multiple, 40 meters. Davidge didn't look back. Looking back was Achebe's job. His job was to move forward and keep the people in front of him alive. But he heard it, or rather felt it. The displacement of air in the tunnel behind them, the subtle change in acoustics that indicated the passage was no longer empty. Things were in it. Things that moved with a fluid efficiency that produced almost no sound, their presence detectable only by the negative space they created. The echoes they absorbed, the air they displaced, the silence they carried with them like a field. Same pattern as the gallery? Karim asked. Same. They're pacing us, not closing. 3 contacts staggered in the passage. 3. In the gallery there had been 2 on the floor and 1 on the ceiling. 3 here following through the tunnel. The same number, different individuals? There was no way to know. The creatures were indistinguishable in the dark. Same coloring, same proportions, same featureless silhouettes. They're pushing us, Karim said. Same behavior, driving us toward the colony. Let them push, Okafor said. We're going where they want us to go anyway. Maintain pace. Don't engage unless they close. They climbed, The gradient steepened, legs burned, breathing labored against the suit's air supply. The team was fit. Aegis selection standards ensured that. But they'd been underground for hours, operating at elevated stress, and the human body's reserves were not infinite. Okafor was setting a pace that balanced speed against sustainability, pushing hard enough to maintain distance from the pursuit without burning out the team before they reached the colony. Marsh was struggling. Davidge noticed it because noticing physical deterioration was his job, the medic's eye that catalogued gait changes, breathing patterns, and the subtle biomechanical signals that indicated a body approaching its limits. Marsh was lagging. Not dramatically, a half step here, a slight hesitation there, but consistently, the gap between him and the formation's center widening by increments. He was carrying weight. The samples he'd taken from Chamber 9, the formation fragments, the biological material, were in his suit's cargo pockets, distributed across his torso and thighs. Davidge had watched him collect them during the documentation period, quick movements at the edges of his assigned tasks, pocketing specimens while the rest of the team was focused on the creature overhead. The weight wasn't enormous, a few kilograms at most, but a few kilograms mattered when you were climbing through a cave system at speed with your heart rate at 160 and your oxygen consumption outpacing your suit's recycler. "Marsh," Davidge said, "you're falling behind. Pick it up." "I'm fine." Marsh's voice was strained, the words pushed out between breaths that were coming too fast and too shallow. "Just need to... the incline. Drop the samples." Marsh didn't respond. He kept moving, kept climbing, his pace fractionally slower than the person ahead of him. The gap widened. 1 meter, 2. "Achebe, distance," Okafor called. 35 meters. They've closed 5 since last check. Closing. The creatures were matching the team's pace and adding to it. A slow, patient compression of the distance between predator and prey. Not charging, not sprinting, simply moving slightly faster, letting the gap shrink meter by meter, while the team's energy depleted and the tunnel stretched upward. "Marsh, drop the goddamn samples," Karim said. "They're irreplaceable. You're irreplaceable. The rocks aren't. Drop them." Marsh's hand went to his cargo pocket. Davidge saw it, the hesitation, the fingers on the seal, the moment of decision. 20 years of scientific ambition, of career investment, of the institutional conditioning that told him discovery was the highest value and sacrifice in its service, was noble rather than stupid. 20 years pulling at his hand, telling him to hold on, telling him that the contents of his pockets were worth more than the seconds they were costing him. He didn't drop them. His hand came away from the pocket. Empty. The seal still closed. 30 meters, Achebe said, still closing. The tunnel narrowed, a bottleneck, the passage constricting to a width of barely 2 meters, the ceiling dropping, the team compressing into single file. Ruiz went through first, then Karim, then Okafor. The bottleneck slowed them, each person having to navigate the tight space individually, and the formation stretched like a rubber band. The front pulling through while the rear waited. Marsh reached the bottleneck. He turned sideways to fit through, the cargo pockets adding bulk, catching on the rock, forcing him to push and squeeze where the others had moved more smoothly. 2 seconds lost. 3. 25 meters, Achebe said. Her voice had shifted. Not panic, Achebe didn't do panic, but a tightening. The first indication that the margin was approaching a threshold she wasn't comfortable with. They're accelerating. Marsh was through the bottleneck. Obi grabbed his arm and pulled him forward, adding momentum. Behind Marsh, Volkov entered the narrow section, moving mechanically, his body following the formation out of programmed reflex, his mind still somewhere else. Davidge was next. He squeezed through the gap, rock scraping his suit on both sides, the claustrophobic pressure of the passage adding to the claustrophobic pressure of the pursuit. Through. He kept moving. Achebe. Last. She entered the bottleneck backward, weapon oriented down the tunnel, covering the approach. 20 meters, she said. I can see them. 3 contacts there. She stopped. The word hung in the tunnel like a held breath. They're running. The creatures had been walking. For the entire pursuit, from the gallery, through the tunnel system, past Junction 7, they had maintained a walking pace. Patient, unhurried, conserving the distance without closing it aggressively. They weren't walking anymore. The sound hit Davidge before the visual confirmation. A rapid, heavy percussion of contact on stone, multiple limbs striking the tunnel floor and walls with a speed that turned the passage behind them into a drum. The creatures were covering ground at a rate that made the team's full sprint look like a stroll, eating the distance in meters per second rather than meters per minute. "Run!" Achebe shouted and fired. The squad weapon roared in the confined space, the muzzle flash strobe lighting the tunnel in white and shadow. Davidge ran. Everyone ran. Formation dissolved. There was no formation anymore, just 9 people sprinting through a cave system with the sound of something terrible accelerating behind them. The tunnel opened slightly. Past the bottleneck, the passage widened again, giving them room to move. Davidge's legs were burning, his lungs screaming against the suit's air supply, his heart hammering at a rate that his medical training catalogued as dangerous and his survival instinct categorized as necessary. Achebe's weapon was firing in bursts, short, controlled, the discipline holding even as the situation collapsed. The rounds were hitting. Davidge could hear the impacts, the dense, wet sound of bullets meeting something that wasn't rock. But the pursuit wasn't slowing. The creatures absorbed the fire and kept coming, their speed undiminished, the distance closing. Marsh fell behind. It was the samples, the weight, the kilograms he'd refused to drop, distributed across his suit, pulling at his legs and his lungs and his pace with every step. He was still running, still trying, his breathing a ragged howl on the suit radio. But he was slower, a step behind. 2, 3. "Marsh!" Davidge shouted. "Drop the weight! Drop it now!" Marsh's hand went to the cargo pocket again. This time the fingers found the seal, tore it open, reached inside. Davidge saw him pull a containment case from the pocket, small, sealed, the formation fragment from Chamber 9. He saw Marsh look at it as he ran, a fraction of a second's attention diverted from the act of survival to the object that was killing him. He dropped it. The case hit the tunnel floor and bounced, spinning into the dark. He reached for the second pocket. He didn't reach it. The creature came from behind and above. It had been on the ceiling, running inverted along the tunnel roof, and it dropped onto Marsh with a precision that suggested targeting rather than opportunity. The impact drove Marsh to the floor. The sound was the same as Sato. That wet, dense concussion of something enormously strong connecting with something fragile. Marsh went down face first, and the creature landed on his back, and Davidge saw, in the strobe of Achebe's muzzle flash, the limbs working. Fast, 3 seconds. The same harvesting efficiency. The creature opened Marsh's suit from behind, splitting the material along the spine, and the things it did to the body beneath were visible only in fragments. A flash of exposed tissue, the bright arterial red of severed vessels, the grey-white of bone revealed by the separation of muscle. Marsh made a sound that wasn't a scream because screaming required air, and the creature's weight on his back had driven the air from his lungs. It was quieter than that, a compression, a forced exhalation that carried with it everything Marsh had been and would never be again. The samples spilled from his pockets, Containment cases, sealed vials, fragments of formation material. They scattered across the tunnel floor around his body. The specimens he'd valued above his pace, his safety, his life. They lay in the dust and the blood and the dark, and the creature crouched over Marsh's remains didn't look at them. They were irrelevant. They had never been what it wanted. Keep moving. Okafor's voice somewhere ahead, cutting through the noise and the horror with the authority of a command that existed independently of the commander's fear. Do not stop. Davidge ran. The team ran. Marsh's body receded behind them, the creature still working, the other two shadows in the tunnel continuing the pursuit past the kill site without pausing. They didn't stop for their companions' feeding. They kept coming. Achebe fired again. The burst was longer this time, less controlled. The first crack in her discipline, the first indication that the mechanical precision she maintained was not infinite. The rounds struck the nearest pursuing creature and it jerked, stumbled, its forward motion disrupted by the impacts. Not stopped. Disrupted. It recovered in less than a second and kept coming, but the disruption had bought a sliver of distance. Junction 4 was ahead. Davidge could see it. The transition from raw cave to reinforced corridor, the concrete and steel of the colony's infrastructure, the sealed doors standing open. 100 meters, 80, 60. Volkov fell, not from an attack, not from a creature. His legs simply stopped working, the mechanical gait that had been carrying him since the gallery finally exceeding the body's ability to sustain it. He went down mid-stride, his foot catching on uneven ground, his body pitching forward with the boneless quality of a person whose coordination had been severed from their consciousness. He hit the tunnel floor hard, his helmet cracking against rock, and lay still. Obi stopped. He was the nearest. 3 meters ahead of Volkov, flanking position. He stopped and turned and reached for the fallen man, because that was what you did, because you didn't leave people on the ground when there were things coming. Obi, leave him, Okafor shouted. Obi didn't leave him. He grabbed Volkov's suit harness and hauled, pulling the Accord officer off the ground with the strength of a man who'd been carrying heavy things in dangerous places for 15 years. Volkov came up, limp, semi-conscious, his weight dead against Obi's grip. Davidge was there. He took Volkov's other arm, draped it over his own shoulders, and together with Obi, they dragged the man toward Junction 4. The weight was enormous. Volkov was not a small man, and his suit added another 20 kilograms, and the tunnel floor was uneven and slick, and every step was a negotiation between speed and balance that Davidge was losing. Behind them, the creatures closed the gap. "Achebe!" Davidge shouted. Achebe was there. She'd positioned herself between the retreating team and the pursuit, walking backward, weapon up, placing her body between the creatures and the people she was protecting. She fired. Not bursts now, single shots, deliberate, aimed at the lead creature with the precision that was her defining characteristic. Each shot hit. Each shot impacted. Each shot produced a reaction, a flinch, a stagger, a momentary disruption of forward motion. That was measurably less effective than the one before. The creature was adapting, learning. Each impact taught it something about the weapon being used against it, and its body was adjusting. Posture shifting, approach angle changing, the presentation of its surface rotating to minimize the shot's effectiveness. Davidge watched it happen in the strobe light of Achebe's fire, and understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water, that they were fighting something that got better at being fought in real time. 40 meters to Junction 4, 30. Volkov woke up, not fully. His eyes were open but unfocused, his legs moving in an uncoordinated attempt to support his weight, that was more hindrance than help. He was saying something. David couldn't hear it over the gunfire and the running and his own ragged breathing. He leaned closer. "Let me go. Let me. You need to. I can't." "Shut up," David said. "We're almost there." 20 meters. The sealed doors of Junction 4 were visible, the colony infrastructure beyond them, the concrete and steel that separated the creature's world from the human one. The creature on the left flank surged forward. It had been flanking wide, using the tunnel wall, and it came off the wall in a diagonal that bypassed Achebe's field of fire and targeted the slowest point of the formation. David and Obi, carrying Volkov, their movement halved by the weight between them. Obi saw it coming. David felt Obi's grip on Volkov shift, felt the decision in the change of his hands, the redistribution of weight. Obi released Volkov's harness and pushed David and Volkov forward toward the doors, and turned to face the incoming creature with his sidearm and his body, and nothing else. "Obi!" David screamed. Obi fired. 4 shots point blank into the creature as it closed the final 3 meters. The rounds hit center mass, the range so close that accuracy was irrelevant. The creature absorbed them and kept coming, and Obi kept firing because that was all there was left to do. The creature hit Obi. The impact carried both of them, man and organism, locked together into the tunnel wall. The sound was catastrophic. Obi's weapon discharged twice more into the creature's body as they hit the rock, the muzzle flash illuminating the contact in snapshots. The creature's limbs wrapping, Obi's body compressed against the wall, the disparity in size and strength rendering the contest meaningless. Obi was not a man who screamed. He made no sound as the creature pinned him. He made no sound as it tore his suit. He made no sound because sound was wasted energy, and Emeka Obi did not waste energy, not even at the end. David ran. He carried Volkov, half dragged, half threw him toward the Junction 4 doors. The corridor was right there. Human space, concrete, steel. The creature holding Obi did not follow. It stayed at the kill site, hunched over the body, working with the same efficient, targeted precision that had taken Sato and Marsh. The other 2 creatures, the one Achebe had been suppressing and the one that had been flanking on the right, stopped. They stopped at the doorway. They stood in the passage at the boundary between cave and colony, and they watched the team retreat through the doors. They did not cross the threshold. Karim and Ruiz seized the doors, the heavy steel panels, standing open for 6 weeks, their hinges stiff but functional. They hauled them closed. The doors swung shut with a sound that echoed through the corridor like a vault ceiling, the metal meeting metal with a finality that was the most beautiful sound David had ever heard. Karim engaged the manual locking mechanism. The bolts shot home, steel into steel. The door was sealed. From the other side, nothing. No impacts, no testing. The creatures had stopped at the threshold and they had not pursued. David sat on the floor of the colony's lower-level corridor and tried to breathe. Volkov was beside him, collapsed against the wall, conscious now but unresponsive. His eyes open, his mouth moving without sound, his mind somewhere that David's medical training could identify but not reach. 7 had gone in, 3 were dead. Sato in the gallery, surprised by something faster than comprehension. Marsh in the tunnel, weighed down by the things he'd valued more than speed. Obi at the threshold, buying the seconds that got everyone else through the door. 3 people who had been alive this morning. 3 people who had eaten breakfast and checked their gear and followed orders and trusted that the team would bring them home. David sat on the cold floor and the silence arrived, and he didn't fight it. He let it come. He let the sound of the gunfire fade and the echoes die and the corridor settle into the deep, mechanical quiet of a colony that had died weeks ago and was now, briefly, occupied by the living again. Then he stood up, because standing up was the next thing, and he went to check on Volkov. They climbed. 7 people, 2 of them damaged, Volkov physically and psychologically, Tanaka still limping on her ankle, moving through the mid-level toward the upper-level access. The biological coating didn't extend this far. The walls were concrete and steel. Human space. Davidge kept talking. Quietly, not the broadcast stream of before, but a low, continuous murmur that served as his own lifeline. Equipment status, medical assessments, route confirmations. The verbal equivalent of placing one foot in front of the other. Each word a step, each sentence a distance covered. They passed the geology lab. They passed the processing facilities. They reached the stairwell and climbed level by level, Davidge and Karim supporting Volkov between them. The upper level, dark, cold. Their helmet lights sweeping corridors they'd cleared that morning, a lifetime ago. The same prefab panels, the same closed doors, the same evidence of abandoned lives. Except the ventilation shafts were glowing. Davidge saw it first because he was looking up. A habit born from hours of tracking things that use ceilings as highways. The ducts that ran the length of the upper-level corridors were emitting a faint luminescence, a biological light that hadn't been there when they'd entered. The organic coating that had covered the lower levels was here now, inside the ductwork, a thin layer that glowed with the cold light of deep-sea organisms. "The vents," he said. "Look at the vents." The team stopped. Lights went to the ceiling. Through the grate openings, the interior of the ventilation system was visible, coated, warm, alive with the faint glow of something that had been growing while they were underground. "It wasn't here this morning," Ruiz said. "No," Tanaka confirmed. Her voice was quiet, exhausted, carrying the weight of a scientist watching a hypothesis confirm itself in real time. "It grew while we were in the caves. The organism is expanding upward, claiming the infrastructure from the inside." "While they herded us down," Karim said. "They kept us below, kept us moving, kept us occupied. And up here, something was working." Expanding territory, pushing the boundary, the creatures below driving the team out of the caves while the organism above advanced into the colony's hidden spaces. A coordinated strategy operating on 2 fronts, one visible, one invisible. One that they'd been aware of and one that had happened behind their backs, in the walls, in the spaces between rooms, in the architecture that humans built and lived inside without ever seeing. "Move," Okafor said. "Surface access, now." They moved. The corridor stretched ahead, the airlock visible at the end, the final barrier, the door to the outside, to the dropship, to orbit and safety. 20 meters of corridor with glowing vents overhead and the knowledge that the spaces above their heads were no longer empty. A sound from the vents. Movement. Fast. Heavy. Something large displacing air in the ductwork. It ran the length of the corridor above them, a rushing percussion that tracked their progress, step for step. "It's in the vents!" someone shouted. Davidge wasn't sure who. Might have been himself. "Keep moving," Okafor shouted back. They ran. The last 20 meters. The final stretch. Karim reached the airlock first, hauled the manual release, the inner door grinding open. The team poured through, Ruiz, Tanaka, Davidge with Volkov, Okafor. Achebe came last, walking backward, weapon up. Her light found the corridor behind them, the prefab walls, the dead lighting, the glowing vents. And at the far end, where the corridor turned toward the canteen, a shape, standing in the intersection, tall and dark and still. The creature that had been born in this colony 6 weeks ago. Carl Engström's legacy, no longer pale, no longer juvenile. 6 weeks of feeding and growing and claiming the space it had been born in, had transformed it into something that filled the corridor with its presence. It watched them leave. It didn't pursue. Kareem sealed the inner door. They cycled the airlock. The outer doors opened onto the frozen surface. Dark rock, ice, the dim red star, the wind. The dropship was 300 meters away. They ran. David ran and talked and carried Volkov and didn't look back, because looking back meant seeing the colony entrance and knowing what was inside it, and understanding that the dark rectangle of the airlock was a mouth that had let them go. They boarded, the ramp sealed. The pilot lifted off. Tenebris fell away. The colony shrank to a point. The planet became a sphere, became a marble, became nothing. David sat on the dropship floor. 7 people had entered the colony. 4 were coming back. 3 were in the tunnels below, in the dark, in the spaces where the creatures lived. What remained of them would be consumed, converted, recycled into the ecosystem that had claimed them. They would not come home. There would be nothing to retrieve. Sato, Marsh, Obi. David said their names quietly under his breath, because someone needed to say them and because saying them was the only memorial he could offer in a dropship climbing toward orbit at the maximum velocity its engines could produce. He said their names, and then he stopped talking, and the silence that followed was the silence of 7 people becoming 4, and the 4 that remained sitting with the weight of the 3 who didn't. There are more stories in this universe, more colonies, more creatures, more people who don't make it home. Like, subscribe and stay in the dark with us.